If he's deaf, go ahead and say whatever you want. Let him sit there like a rotting log, useless. That was my son's voice, my only son, the boy I raised alone after my wife died of cancer. I once skipped meals so he could eat the best of what I had. For 12 straight years, I worked 2 jobs so we could afford his college tuition. My whole life, I had one goal: to give him a better life than mine. And now, he was standing in the kitchen of the suburban house outside Phoenix, the house I bought with every penny I'd saved, and calling me useless. But you know what hurt the most? I had to pretend I didn't hear, because it was all part of the plan. I pretended to be deaf. I played the role of a forgetful old man who couldn't hear the TV, didn't answer when called, and didn't react to their whispered cruelty behind my back. I played that part for nearly a year. I didn't do it out of hate. I did it because I needed to know the truth. And what I heard in the dark, the words they thought I couldn't understand, crushed my heart. But they also woke me up, stronger than ever. Some nights I lay quietly in the small closet-like room they assigned me in the basement, listening to their mocking laughter, clattering dishes, and the cruel nicknames they called each other, thinking I couldn't understand. I cried silently, but never let a tear fall where they could see. I used to believe if you lived well, eventually your children would see it. But no, sometimes the ones you love most are the first to push you into the shadows. If you've ever felt rejected by your own family, if you've ever been hurt by misplaced trust, this is your story. Don't look away, because the ending will take your breath away. Press subscribe if you've ever felt underestimated, hurt, or alone. You're not by yourself. My name is Harold Walker. I'm 75 years old. I was a mechanic in Tucson, Arizona, working with machines, oil, and the smell of hot metal my whole life. I didn't have much schooling, but I lived by a simple code: work hard, be honest, and love my son with all my heart. After my wife, Linda, died from cancer, I nearly collapsed. She was the only light I had left, but I refused to give in. I had Michael. I believed that as long as I lived for him, she could rest peacefully. Michael was bright, studious, and earned a scholarship to a state university in finance. I was proud. I took night shifts at the garage and even sold my vintage car I'd worked so hard to save, just so he wouldn't lack for anything in college. I didn't regret a thing. He was the most beautiful part left of my life. Michael married a young lawyer from Phoenix named Emily. At first, I liked her. Polite, articulate, she knew how to impress an older man. But over time, I noticed something cold behind that smile. When I sold my Tucson home and moved in with them in Phoenix, I thought I'd enjoy a peaceful retirement, help with the baby, tend the garden, fix things around the house. But before long, I began to feel like I didn't belong. They put me in a basement room next to the laundry, sharing a bathroom that was more like a storage closet. I ate dinner alone. They said they were busy with meetings. I rarely saw my granddaughter. They said, "Don't let Grandpa near her. He's old and could spread germs." I forced a smile. I understood. Maybe I was old, but not useless. I could still fix pipes, climb roofs, arrange flowers to brighten a gloomy afternoon. But no one seemed to need that here. Sometimes I heard adult laughter behind closed doors, quiet, sneaky laughter, not my granddaughter's. When I walked into the living room, the atmosphere changed, an unfamiliar chill, like I was a stranger in a home I'd helped build. And then, I started hearing things I shouldn't. Quiet conversations, whispers they thought I couldn't pick up. That's when I began pretending to be deaf, so I could hear better. It all started one October morning when I came downstairs early for coffee. I was still pretending to be deaf, but as I turned on the faucet, I heard Michael and Emily's hurried footsteps. They didn't know I was there. They didn't care. They spoke through the living room wall, loud enough for me to hear. "How much longer do you think he'll live? Doesn't it bother you? Him just wandering around the house?" Michael sighed. I was thinking, if we send him to a nursing home now, it looks less suspicious. Emily laughed. Don't be naive. If we wait until he really weakens, it'll take longer to push him out. We handle it now. Makes us look smart. I froze by the coffee maker. My vision blurred. I had suspected my daughter-in-law disliked me, but I never imagined they'd plan to get rid of me, like old furniture. From that moment on, everything became clear. I paid attention to every small detail. Conversations they held when I was near, disapproving glances when I walked in. Then came the day I heard something that broke me, then fueled me. The bank documents he signed, I've changed them into our joint account. When he dies, it all goes to us. Michael whispered, he hasn't suspected anything, right? Emily smirked. Do you think he remembers what day it is? Deaf, old, forgetful. Easier to fool than a child. Something inside me shattered. Not because of the money, because my own son, the child I devoted my life to, was teaming up with his wife to steal from me, treating me with absolute contempt. Then came the silent maneuvers, removing my things, hiding my medication, forgetting to take me to checkups. Emily began talking over me. He's starting to hallucinate. He doesn't remember? I already told him last week. They were building a case, portraying me as senile, so their actions could seem justified down the line. I played along, the clueless, deaf old man sitting by the window like a shadow. But inwardly, I began recording everything. Every sentence, every action. I secretly installed voice recorders in the living room, the kitchen, the hallway. I was no longer the fool. I was a betrayed father, and I was more alert than ever. Then one day, while they thought I was asleep, I heard Emily say to Michael, I've contacted the care center. They have availability next month. Let's move him then, once and for all. I sat in darkness for hours that night. But inside me, the accumulation of pain, humiliation, and disappointment turned into something else. Resolve. I knew what I had to do. From that day on, I meticulously logged everything in an old notebook. Each coerced signature, every missed meal, every altered pill. Nothing escaped my watch. I started leaving traces, voice recordings, photos, financial records. I was no longer a victim. I was a father preparing for an unexpected battle. Once I overheard Emily on the phone. He's still alive, but honestly, just looking at him is suffocating, like a ghost. I swear, if he dies tomorrow, I won't shed a tear. Her voice calm and polite, but her words cut like a dagger. By that point, I didn't fear the pain anymore. I feared their indifference, my son's eyes passing through me as if I didn't exist. Quiet cruelty kills a person without a fight. I remembered when I rocked him to sleep with hands calloused from night shifts. I remembered the snowy morning I waited outside his school just to tuck an extra coat on him. And now? One morning, greeting wouldn't be asked for. One look, never given. I realized it was time to stop hoping and start acting. I began waking at 3 a.m., not from insomnia, but to plan, to review my recordings. Sitting at a small basement table, pencil in hand, headphones on, the old warrior preparing for battle. I discovered things nobody would believe if I told them. They intentionally cut power to my room, claiming a faulty circuit. I slept without fan or light in the scorching Arizona heat. Next morning, Emily said, "You should get used to sleeping less when you're old." Another day, my food vanished from the fridge, even the plain yogurt I'd set aside. When I asked, Emily sneered. "You must have forgotten. You didn't have any yogurt yesterday." I didn't argue. I wrote it down. Every small detail. Justice doesn't come from yelling. It comes from evidence and patience. Nights later, I recorded their conversations with a tiny mic hidden in a desk lamp. They spoke about withdrawing money, hiding assets from taxes, even planning to move to another state to avoid responsibility for the old man. I swore to myself, no matter what happens, I won't let them get away. But I won't make a scene. I'll let the truth speak. And I prepared. I started sending the recordings to an old friend, Frank, a retired detective. He was the only person I trusted. After listening to a few clips, he fell silent. Then he said, "Harold, family cases are tough, but this needs exposure." I nodded. Not for revenge, but for restoration of honor. My honor as a father, a man utterly demeaned. In the mirror, I saw deep wrinkles, fading eyesight, but behind that, a man who had never given up. They misjudged me, and they were about to face what they never expected, the comeback of a father once patient, but never powerless. I didn't strike back with some dramatic twist like in the movies. No, I started with an old printer. I printed copies of everything: audio transcripts, altered documents, fake statements signed under pressure. I filed them carefully, one folder for me, one for a lawyer, one for Social Security. Then I reached out to a legal aid office for elder rights. At first they were skeptical, as expected, seeing an old man with trembling hands claiming his son had taken his assets. But the moment I dropped the thick stack of evidence on the table, their tone changed. "We've never seen a case this meticulously documented by a senior," the young attorney said. "Are you planning to sue?" I shook my head. "No, I want to protect myself, and if possible, I want them to know I heard it all." I didn't tell Michael or Emily anything. I kept playing the deaf old man, still shuffling down the hallway, still mumbling to myself as if unaware. Behind the scenes, I hired an independent financial advisor to audit the account changes. Sure enough, clear evidence of asset manipulation and financial abuse. I also started taking morning walks, not just for health, but to calm my mind. There's something healing about walking under morning sunlight, hearing birdsong, breathing deep, knowing I was no longer cornered in my own home. Every day, I wrote in a journal, not just the pain anymore, but the steps of recovery. I went to the local public library. There I met others, elders who had been hurt by their own families. We didn't need to say much. One look was enough. I know that pain. I've been there. I've fallen too. I got connected with a support group for elderly abuse survivors, weekly sharing circles. That's where I first told my story, not to be pitied, but to say, I'm still standing, and I won't be silent anymore. I returned to hobbies I had once loved. I painted again, like I did in my youth. My hands trembled, but my heart found peace with each stroke. I grew small flower pots on the balcony. Watering them each morning became my gentle reminder. Keep living, not for revenge, but to be proof that you endured. Eventually, I wrote everything down, carefully, clearly in a long letter. Not to send to Michael or Emily, but to my future self. So one day I could read it and say, I was stronger than I thought. I started looking for volunteer work, not for money, but to feel useful again. A nearby elder care center invited me to speak about resilience, forgiveness, and life skills. At first, just a few people came, but the room slowly filled. They said, "The way you talk, it feels like a movie." I smiled. Maybe it's because I was living one. And this time, I chose to be the main character, not a bystander. I never slandered my son. I never accused my daughter-in-law. I just told the truth with the heart of a father who had let go of bitterness and held only compassion for himself and for others like him. Eventually, I was invited to local schools to speak on a topic called listening to the elderly, not just with ears, but with the heart. Every time I stepped onto that small stage, I began with one line. I once pretended to be deaf, and because of that, I heard more than I ever imagined. And every time I said it, my chest felt lighter, my heart felt clearer, as if those buried years were finally being released. Now I no longer live with the question, why did my son do this to me? Instead, I live with the answer, I did everything I could not to stay a victim. Sometimes I receive letters from strangers, people who had seen me at a talk or read my story in a local paper. A single mother whose children had abandoned her wrote, "Your story gave me the courage to get up and stop feeling worthless." An unemployed man wrote, "I used to think I was a burden. Now I'm learning to be useful again, just like you." We don't realize how powerful storytelling is until a simple line, a sincere look, becomes the spark of someone else's hope. I didn't grow old in the silence I once feared. I'm living, truly living, in every word I speak, every truth I share, and every light step I take down the quiet neighborhood street. People now call me Grandpa Ray the storyteller. But me? I'm just a man who was once broken, and now trying to heal. Not just for myself, but for anyone who needs to hear one thing. You are not invisible. I survived. And that is the most miraculous thing I've ever done. The day I walked into the courtroom, I didn't carry anger. I carried the truth, and the quiet belief that the truth alone was enough to help me stand tall, without needing to shout or accuse. Michael and Emily sat across the aisle. At first, their faces were smug, but as my lawyer calmly laid out each piece of evidence, the recordings they thought I hadn't heard, the signatures I had been pressured into, the shady financial transfers, they began to shift in their seats. I didn't look at them. I looked at the judge, and I spoke, for the first time after months of pretending to be deaf, with a voice that was low, steady, and clear. I am a victim, but I'm not here to weep. I'm here to reclaim my truth and my dignity. The courtroom went silent. I caught a subtle change in the judge's eyes. He squinted slightly, like he too was a father. I saw a few people in the audience lower their heads, and I knew they were listening, not just with ears, but with their hearts. Emily stuttered. Michael tried to push back, but the more they spoke, the more obvious their manipulation became. When the neighbor took the stand, a woman who had overheard their conversation about getting rid of the old man quickly, everything became undeniable. The judge's ruling was firm. All assets were to be returned. All coerced signatures were declared void. I, Raymond Jameson, was restored as the rightful owner of my estate. Both Michael and Emily were fined for financial fraud and elder abuse. I didn't smile in victory. I simply nodded, as if to say to myself, "You did the right thing." As I walked out of the courthouse, a local reporter approached me. All I said was, "When you think an old person can't hear, remember, they may be listening with their whole heart." Michael and Emily couldn't meet my eyes. Emily walked quickly with her head down. Michael hesitated, glanced back briefly, then turned away. I didn't chase after them. I didn't need an apology. I had the truth. And that was enough. But what surprised me the most was the community's response. Neighbors who once looked at me with doubt now came to shake my hand. Strangers who had read my story wrote thank you letters. I was even invited to speak at a conference about protecting the elderly from financial abuse. This victory wasn't about revenge. It was a confirmation. You don't have to scream to be heard. Sometimes patience, preparation, and faith in justice is enough to turn everything around. And me? A 75-year-old man? I had done just that, not with rage, but with wisdom, resilience, and a deep belief that truth will always find its way to the surface. There are things you can never get back. Trust once shattered, family dinners that turned cold. But what you gain is even more precious, the respect you reclaim from society and from yourself. I didn't let the pain turn me into an enemy of life. A few days after the trial, I received a letter from someone I'd never met. She was a retired teacher who wrote, "I cried reading your story. You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for all of us, those who were once dismissed, discarded, or silenced." I read that letter under the golden light of evening, And in that moment, I knew. True victory doesn't lie in who gets punished or who lowers their head. It's in walking forward, with your head held high, your heart unburdened, and your soul intact. One afternoon, while reading under the porch roof of my new home, a teenager I didn't know came up to me. He stood awkwardly and said, "Sir, I just wanted to say, you made me believe in justice again. My dad was betrayed too, but he didn't get the chance to clear his name like you did." I invited him to sit, poured a glass of lemonade, and we sat there, two people from different generations, sharing the same belief, that justice, even when delayed, is still light. As the sun dipped behind my weathered roof, I realized this story didn't end in court. It lives on, in every gaze, every letter, every handshake of gratitude. And in me, a man once seen as a burden, now living proof that honor can be stolen. But dignity? No one can take that from you, unless you surrender it. A few months later, I received a call from the local TV station. They wanted to do a special feature on elderly individuals who bravely stood up to injustice in their own families. I said yes, not to be famous, but because I understood. Every story told becomes a mirror for someone still lost in the dark. During filming, they brought me back to the old house, the silent battlefield of my past. I stood in the yard, looked up at the window where I once played deaf to hear the truth, and said to the camera, I wasn't a victim, I was a survivor. I know somewhere out there are fathers and mothers suffering in silence like I once did. I hope they hear me, see me, and know they're not alone. Justice isn't always swift, but it never abandons those who don't give up. And just like that, I wrote the final chapter of my story, not in anger, but with faith, dignity, and the quiet light of truth. After everything, I didn't go back to the old house. I moved to a small lakeside town in Oregon, where every morning I can brew a cup of tea, step onto my wooden porch, and watch the sun rise through rows of maple trees. I didn't cut off contact with Michael and Emily completely. I sent them a letter, not to accuse or blame, but simply to say, I hope one day you'll find something truly good within yourselves. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to carry resentment into the rest of my life. I didn't expect a reply, and I didn't get one. But I wasn't disappointed, because forgiveness was never a gift for them. It was a gift for myself. I started a garden, grew vegetables, raised a few chickens. I began tutoring English for local immigrant children. They call me Mr. J, short for Jameson. Every afternoon, they show up at my porch with books in hand and faces glowing with joy. One day, a little girl from Mexico hugged me tightly and said, "You remind me of my grandpa. He passed away, but I think he would have liked you." I cried that day, but not from sadness. For the first time in years, I felt truly useful. Not to the family who betrayed me, but to a new kind of family. One built not on blood, but on choice and kindness. At night, I meditate for a few minutes before sleep. With candlelight flickering and a hint of lavender in the room, I've learned how to accept the past without being chained to it. I write in my journal, recording each small step of healing. Every sentence feels like digging into the soil of my soul, so something new can grow. Yes, I lost things, but I am not defined by what I lost. I was betrayed, but I didn't betray life in return. They saw me as a burden, but today I lift hope for others, for the kids, the neighbors, and for myself. Sometimes people ask me, "Don't you feel angry they never came back? Don't you wish things had been different?" I just smile. Of course I was angry, but I refuse to let that anger define the rest of my days. I choose peace, because peace is lighter to carry. This world already has enough shouting. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose silence. A silence that heals. I once pretended to be deaf to hear the truth. Now, I sit in true silence to hear my own heart. And if you, yes, you, are carrying a wound like I once did, please remember this. You are not alone. Peace doesn't come from erasing the past. It comes from rising again, brushing off the dust, and walking forward with every bit of dignity still left in you. Because no one can take away your dignity unless you're the one who lets it go. I once thought my life would end in loneliness. But here, between nature and the warmth of kind strangers, I've found a new chapter. Not flashy, not loud, but full of meaning. In the fall, I hosted an outdoor tea gathering for the neighborhood. Everyone brought a story, and when I told mine, no one cried, but everyone was silent. A widower took my hand and said, "Thank you. Now I know. I still have a life worth living." I smiled, because at last I had become a light, not just for myself, but for those who had once been lost like me. That's how I live now, without bitterness, without blame, only gratitude, gentleness, and a quiet belief that sometimes the best things in life don't come from blood ties, but from hearts that choose love and forgiveness. And if someone out there is still stumbling through pain as I once did, let me say this: no one can walk the road for you, but you don't have to walk it alone. Find your first spark. It could be a hot cup of tea, a good book, or a kind neighbor. Let that tiny light lead you toward peace, because sometimes it's in the loneliest stretches of the road that we finally find our truest selves. Have you ever felt like I did? Like you were slowly pushed to the edge by the very people you loved most? Like your voice no longer mattered in the home you once built with your whole heart? If you've ever found yourself in that place, I want you to know this: you are not alone. There are millions of us, people who have been hurt, betrayed, and left behind, but still chose to stand up, wipe away the tears, and keep going. Not because we didn't feel pain, but because we understood. Staying in pain is never the way out. I share my story not to be pitied, but to remind you, even in the darkest chapter of your life, you can still find the light. Whether you feel ignored, abandoned, or silently struggling, you still have the right to rise and reclaim your worth. And if my story touched something in your heart, please leave a comment. Even just one sentence. Tell your story, because somewhere out there, someone might need to hear exactly what you are about to say. We often don't realize how powerful our words are until they become the reason someone else climbs out of their darkness. Don't forget to share this video with someone you care about, and subscribe for more stories of healing and hope. I believe every person carries a wound, but inside that wound is a door that leads to rebirth. Let's walk through that door together, not for revenge, but because we deserve lives filled with peace, freedom, and dignity. Because in the end, forgiveness isn't something you give to someone else. It's something you give to your own heart. And if your parents are still alive, please ask them this one question. Mom, Dad, are you happy? Have I ever done something that hurt you? That one small question might be the thread that pulls a broken relationship back from the edge. Don't wait until it's too late, until you're left whispering, "If only." And if you're someone carrying deep wounds within your own family, I want you to hold on. The road to healing is never straight. There will be days when you want to give up, nights when you cry alone. But please, don't give up. The sunrise will still come. Even if it's late, leave a dot, a heart emoji, a word, anything, just to let me know you're still here. Because sometimes, knowing even one person understands is enough to ease the weight in our chest. Thank you for listening to my story. And if you found meaning in it, Please help me share it with someone who needs it most. You might never know it, but today you might give someone a reason to keep going. And lastly, if you've ever thought it was too late to start over, please remember, it is never too late to love yourself again. As long as you still breathe, as long as your heart still beats, you still have time to write a new chapter. One that doesn't begin with bitterness, but with a choice to live kindly, to live honestly, to live in peace. My name is Jameson, and this was my story. Now tell me, how will your story unfold? And if you ever feel like your journey is too lonely, remember, as long as even one person listens, there is still hope. Be that listener for someone else. One comment, one message, one act of kindness might be the light that guides someone out of their own darkness. You don't have to be strong all the time. Sometimes, just having the courage to say, "I've been hurt, I've fallen, but I'm learning to stand again," that alone is extraordinary. I know you're stronger than you think, and if you've read this far, then maybe you are the light someone else has been waiting for. Don't hold it in. Share it. Become the main character in your own healing journey, starting right now.